After 10 years building his empire from nothing, David called everyone to announce the new COO position. I straightened my blazer, tasting victory, until his ex-girlfriend Melissa waltzed in wearing designer heels. "Everyone, meet our new Chief Operating Officer," he announced, his eyes avoiding mine. That night, I deleted a decade of loyalty from my laptop. By morning, I was sitting across from his biggest rival with one sentence: "I know exactly how to destroy him." The Reynolds Enterprises office buzzed with energy that morning. As I stepped off the elevator, 3 different colleagues offered congratulations before I even reached my office. "Big day, Amanda." Tyler from marketing winked, raising his coffee mug in salute. "About time he made it official," Jen from HR whispered, squeezing my arm as we passed in the hallway. I smiled politely, neither confirming nor denying what everyone already assumed. After 8 years of being David Reynolds' right hand, of course I would be named Chief Operating Officer. The position had essentially been mine in everything but title for the past 3 years anyway. My phone vibrated with a calendar notification: executive announcement, conference room A, 10 a.m. I took a deep breath, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from my charcoal pencil skirt. This was the culmination of 3,650 days of early mornings, late nights, cancelled vacations, and postponed personal milestones. The promotion was not just deserved, it was promised. "Ready for your coronation, Queen Amanda," joked Marco, our Chief Financial Officer, as we headed toward the conference room together. At 45, he was the elder statesman of our executive team, having joined when we upgraded from David's apartment to our first real office space. "Just ready for the paperwork to catch up with reality," I replied, allowing myself a rare moment of pride. The conference room filled quickly. Our team had grown from 5 scrappy entrepreneurs to over 200 employees across 3 floors of prime downtown real estate. David stood at the head of the table, uncharacteristically fidgeting with his collar. Something felt off. I scanned the room, noting the empty chair to David's right, traditionally, the spot reserved for the second-in-command. My spot. So why was I still in my usual seat 3 chairs down? "Thanks for coming together on short notice," David began, his voice carrying that practiced CEO confidence that I'd helped him perfect. "As you know, Reynolds Enterprises has experienced unprecedented growth over the past 2 years. Our expansion into the European market and our acquisition of TechVantage have positioned us for." The glass door swung open, interrupting his well-rehearsed speech. Everyone turned to see a woman I recognized immediately but hadn't seen in years. Melissa Chen, David's ex-girlfriend from business school. They'd dated for 3 years before she left to pursue her MBA at Wharton, choosing her career over their relationship. That was 2 years before I met David. She hadn't changed much, still model-thin with perfect hair that somehow looked both professional and camera-ready. Her Louboutins clicked purposefully across the hardwood floor as she made her way to the empty chair beside David. My stomach dropped. A cold wave of realization washed over me before David even continued speaking. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was terrible." David's smile stretched a little too wide. "Perfect timing, actually. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Melissa Chen. Melissa has just completed her MBA at Wharton and brings extensive experience from her work with Boston Consulting Group." The room stayed silent. Most people were looking between Melissa and me, confusion evident on their faces. "I'm thrilled to announce that Melissa will be joining Reynolds Enterprises as our new Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I felt Marco stiffen beside me. Across the table, Jen from HR stared at her notepad, unwilling to make eye contact with anyone. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a skill honed through countless difficult negotiations. Inside, a hurricane raged. 10 years of sacrifices flashed before my eyes in an instant. Melissa's connections in the Asian markets and her fresh perspective will help take us to the next level, David continued, still avoiding my gaze. "I'm sure you'll all make her feel welcome." The meeting continued with Melissa outlining her vision for the company. My company, the one I had built alongside David from nothing. Each word was a blade between my ribs, but I sat perfectly still, back straight, expression pleasant. Never let them see you bleed. 40 excruciating minutes later, David wrapped up. Amanda, could you stay behind for a moment? The others filed out, several shooting sympathetic glances my way. Marco squeezed my shoulder briefly as he passed, a gesture worth more than any words. When the door closed, I finally met David's eyes. Interesting announcement. Amanda, I know this comes as a surprise. A surprise. My voice remained deadly calm. Is that what we're calling a complete betrayal now? David had the decency to flinch. It's not personal. Melissa brings valuable connections and a prestigious educational background that I don't have because I was too busy building your company to get an MBA, I finished for him. Tell me something, David. Was this always the plan? Keep Amanda around to do the heavy lifting, then bring in your ex when it's time to hand out the big titles. That's not fair. You've been well compensated for your work here. My work? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. Reynolds Enterprises exists because of me. The Henderson deal that saved us from bankruptcy 5 years ago? That was me, working from a hospital bed with pneumonia. The TechVantage acquisition you're so proud of? I orchestrated that while you were on your skiing trip in Aspen. David's expression hardened. I've always valued your contributions, Amanda, but this is business. Melissa's qualifications. Don't insult me by pretending this is about qualifications. I stood, gathering my notebook. You're making a mistake that will cost you everything you've built. And I won't stick around to watch. I walked out, head high, ignoring the curious stares from colleagues who clearly understood something monumental had just happened. In my office, I closed the door and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of silent screaming rage before opening my laptop. I first met David Reynolds at the Chicago Tech Summit in 2013. He was just another eager entrepreneur with a half-baked idea for enterprise software, but something about his pitch had potential. I was 3 years into a dead-end marketing role at Parker Industries, hungry for something more meaningful. Your distribution model is backwards, I told him bluntly after his fumbling presentation to a nearly empty conference room. And your UI looks like it was designed in 1998. Instead of being offended, David had laughed. Finally, someone who doesn't just smile and nod. What would you do differently? By midnight, we were still huddled in the hotel lobby, my laptop open between us, redesigning his entire business approach. 2 weeks later, I quit Parker Industries to join Reynolds Software Solutions. Just David, his college roommate who coded the product, and me working out of David's converted dining room. Those early days were exhilarating. We worked 18-hour days fueled by cheap pizza and expensive dreams. I slept on David's couch more nights than I slept in my own apartment. There was no work-life balance because work was life. We were building something that mattered. When this takes off, David used to say, you'll be right there with me. Partners in everything but name. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's ideas. David was the visionary, but I was the architect who turned his scattered brilliance into actionable strategy. 6 months in, we landed our first major client, a mid-sized insurance company willing to take a chance on our fledgling software. David and I celebrated with cheap champagne in plastic cups. To the first of many, he toasted, his eyes bright with possibility. Amanda, I couldn't do this without you. Those words became my North Star. I cancelled a vacation with my then-boyfriend Jason to finish the implementation. Jason ended things the following week, unable to compete with my devotion to the company. I barely noticed the loss. The real test came 18 months later. We'd moved into our first real office, a cramped space above a Thai restaurant that perpetually smelled of lemongrass, and hired 3 developers and a sales guy. The company had evolved into Reynolds Enterprises, with a growing client list and promising prospects. Then disaster struck. Our biggest client threatened to pull out after experiencing system failures. We stood to lose 60% of our revenue overnight. We're finished, David said, pacing our tiny conference room, running his hands through his hair. We can't survive this. I refuse to accept defeat. Give me 3 days. For 72 hours straight, I didn't leave the office. I coordinated with our developers to patch critical issues, reworked our entire service agreement, and prepared a comprehensive proposal that not only addressed the client's concerns but expanded our relationship. The morning of the meeting, I was running a 102-degree fever. Pneumonia, as I would later learn. David wanted to reschedule. If we reschedule, we're showing weakness, I insisted, downing more Tylenol. They'll walk. I delivered that presentation in a fever haze, my voice barely above a rasp. By the end, not only had I saved the account, but I'd secured a 3-year contract extension worth double our previous agreement. David drove me straight to the emergency room afterward. While hooked to and for, I took 3 client calls and finalized the contract details. You're insane, David had said, shaking his head in disbelief. Brilliant, but insane. That's why you need me, I'd replied. I make your impossible possible. As Reynolds Enterprises grew, so did my responsibilities. I oversaw operations, shaped our service offerings, and built our client success team from the ground up. When we moved into our downtown headquarters 3 years ago, David insisted my office be adjacent to his. The brain trust needs to stay connected, he'd explained to the design team. There were other offers over the years, competitors who recognized my value even if my title didn't reflect it. Each time, David convinced me to stay. You've built this place, Amanda. Your fingerprints are on everything we do, he told me during one particularly tempting offer from a rival firm. I'm planning to create a COO position next quarter. Who else would I possibly choose? That was 18 months ago. The COO position materialized 6 months later, but David claimed the timing wasn't right to fill it. Let's stabilize after the TechVantage acquisition, he'd said. Then we'll make it official. I trusted him. Fool that I was. Through it all, David occasionally mentioned Melissa, the one who got away. They dated during his early business ventures before Reynolds. She'd chosen Wharton over their relationship, apparently. I'd always found it odd how he spoke of her, a mixture of resentment and reverence. Melissa would have approached this differently, he'd sometimes say when we faced a tough decision. I'd always brushed it off as harmless reminiscing. Now I understood. I wasn't his partner. I was his placeholder. I maintained perfect composure for exactly 8 hours and 22 minutes after David's announcement. I smiled at Melissa when she toured the office. I answered questions in the emergency executive meeting. I even graciously offered to help with the transition when David cornered me by the coffee machine, desperation leaking through his CEO veneer. Only when I locked my apartment door behind me did I finally allow the mask to drop. I held my keys against the wall hard enough to dent the plaster, then sank to the floor, a decade of suppressed rage and disappointment pouring out in ugly, racking sobs. When the storm passed, I wiped my face, poured a generous glass of Macallan 18, a gift from David for our 5th company anniversary, and opened my laptop. It was time for Amanda Chen, architect of Reynolds Enterprises' success, to architect her own revenge. My first call was to an old colleague, Thomas Weber. He'd left Reynolds 2 years earlier to join Sullivan International, our biggest competitor and David's personal nemesis. Victoria Sullivan had poached him with an aggressive compensation package that David had refused to match. Amanda? It's almost midnight. Everything okay? Thomas answered, concern evident in his voice. I'm ready to have that conversation we never finished, I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. A pause. You're leaving Reynolds? Not a question. David just appointed his ex-girlfriend as COO. Thomas whistled low. That's spectacularly stupid of him. Are you free for breakfast tomorrow? Victoria would kill me if I didn't make this introduction immediately. By 7 a.m., I was seated across from Victoria Sullivan at an exclusive breakfast spot downtown. At 52, she radiated the confidence of someone who'd built her empire without apology or compromise. Her silver-streaked black hair was cut in a sharp bob that matched her reputation, precise, distinctive, and uncompromising. I've been waiting for David Reynolds to make a mistake like this for years, Victoria said, stirring her coffee methodically. His only real competitive advantage was you, Amanda. I raised an eyebrow. You've been monitoring me. Of course. I make it my business to know who's actually running my competitors' operations. She slid a folder across the table. This is what I'm prepared to offer. Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Equity options. Signing bonus that should ease any financial concerns about your departure. The numbers made me blink twice. It was nearly double my current compensation. Why this position? I asked. Because I create roles for exceptional talent, not force exceptional talent into predetermined boxes. Her smile was wolfish. Unlike David, I recognize what you're worth. I signed the offer before finishing my Eggs Benedict. Back at Reynolds, I composed my resignation letter, short, professional, and devoid of emotion. I cleared personal items from my office, leaving behind the awards and recognition that technically belonged to the company. I transferred essential operational documents to the shared drive, removed my personal files, and systematically deleted evidence of my unpaid overtime and unrecognized contributions. At precisely 10 a.m., I requested a meeting with David. His assistant's eyes widened when I explained the purpose. Amanda, David began when I entered his office, I'm glad you. I placed my resignation letter on his desk. This serves as my 2-week notice, though I'm happy to depart immediately if you prefer. The color drained from his face. You can't be serious. Sullivan International values my experience and leadership. They've created a senior VP position for me. David stood abruptly. Victoria Sullivan approached you? That's a conflict of interest. I approached them, I corrected coolly. There's no non-compete in my contract. You always said they weren't worth the legal fees, remember? His expression shifted from shock to calculation. What will it take to keep you? Name your price, Amanda. We can match whatever they. It was never about money, David. It was about respect. I removed my company ID from around my neck. You chose someone with connections over someone with commitment. I hope it works out for you. The clients trust you, he said, panic edging into his voice. Henderson specifically asked for you on their renewal. East Point won't work with anyone else. You're walking away from relationships you've built for years. No, I'm taking those relationships with me. The difference between Melissa and me? Those clients trust me, not the Reynolds name. His face darkened. That sounds like a threat. It's a reality check. You built this company on my shoulders, then decided my shoulders weren't good enough to stand beside you. Actions have consequences. Word spread quickly. By lunchtime, my inbox overflowed with messages from colleagues. Jen from HR cornered me in the break room. Is it true? You actually leaving? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Half the executive team is ready to revolt. Marco was more blunt when he barged into my office. This is insanity. David's made a catastrophic error. Let me talk to him. It's done, Marco, I said gently. Some bridges can't be unburned. By day's end, I'd handed off my immediate responsibilities and cleared out my office. In the elevator down to the lobby, I removed my keycard from my wallet and looked at it one last time. 10 years condensed into a plastic rectangle. In the marble lobby where I'd proudly guided countless clients, I placed the keycard on the security desk. Miss Chen, the security guard called as I walked toward the revolving door. Are you coming back tomorrow? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. No, James. I'm not coming back at all. Sullivan International's headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a gleaming glass tower across town. Unlike the warm woods and traditional aesthetic of Reynolds Enterprises, Sullivan embraced modernism, open concept floors, ergonomic furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic city views. Welcome to the winning team, Thomas greeted me in the lobby, handing me a sleek black access card emblazoned with the Sullivan logo. Victoria doesn't believe in making people wait to get started. I'd taken exactly 1 day off between jobs, Just enough time to sleep for 12 hours straight and process the whirlwind transformation of my professional life. Now, stepping into Sullivan's headquarters, the magnitude of my decision finally hit me. I was starting over after a decade. Nervous? Thomas asked, reading my expression. Recalibrating, I corrected him. Feels strange to walk into an office I didn't help design. Give it a week. You'll be redesigning ours too. Victoria's assistant showed me to my new office, corner placement with views that made Reynolds' executive floor look like it was housed in a basement. My name was already etched on a brushed metal plate beside the door. The IT team has set up your systems, the assistant explained. Victoria would like to see you at 10 a.m. to introduce you to your direct reports. Direct reports. At Reynolds, I'd managed multiple teams without the title or compensation to match. Here, my authority was formalized from day one. Victoria didn't waste time with small talk when I entered her office. We're finalizing our pitch for the Tricorp account next week, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. David's been courting them for months. I want you to take point. Tricorp was the golden goose of client acquisitions, a pharmaceutical conglomerate whose business could single-handedly boost annual revenue by 30%. Reynolds had been positioning for months to land them. David's planning to have Melissa lead their pitch, I said, scanning the preliminary materials. Victoria's eyebrow arched. Is that so? Even better. Review what we have, then meet with the team at 11. They're expecting you. My new team consisted of 8 directors, each managing specialized divisions. They gathered in the conference room, expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical. This is Amanda Chen, Victoria announced, then left me to handle the rest. I recognized the wariness in their eyes. I was an outsider, parachuted into leadership above people who'd been grinding away at Sullivan for years. Let me address the elephant in the room, I began. Yes, I came from Reynolds. No, I'm not a spy or a temporary flight of fancy for Victoria. I'm here because Reynolds made the mistake of undervaluing expertise and loyalty, a mistake Sullivan clearly doesn't make, judging by the talent in this room. A few expressions softened, but most remained guarded. I don't expect your trust immediately. I expect to earn it, I continued. Starting with the Tricorp account. I spent the next hour absorbing their strategy, asking questions rather than imposing immediate changes. Their approach was solid but conventional, exactly what Reynolds would expect us to do. Reynolds will emphasize their established protocols and Melissa's fresh-Wharton perspective, I explained. They'll position themselves as the perfect blend of stability and innovation. How do we counter that? Asked Diana Kwon, Director of Client Solutions. By doing what they can't, I replied. Reynolds doesn't actually understand Tricorp's pain points because they've never had someone on the inside. But Tricorp's CFO used to work at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, correct? Nods around the table. 3 years ago, I led a complete systems overhaul for Meridian. I know exactly what keeps their executives up at night, what their board prioritizes, and what systems they've been using. That's our edge. For the next 3 days, I worked alongside the team to completely reimagine our approach. Rather than generic corporate solutions, we crafted a proposal addressing Tricorp's unique challenges, the same challenges that had plagued Meridian before our intervention. On Thursday, we presented the revised strategy to Victoria. When we finished, she studied me for a long moment before speaking. In 4 days, you've done more with this team than your predecessor did in 4 months, she said. I knew you were good, Amanda. I didn't realize you were this good. The earliest validation came the following Tuesday. Diana burst into my office without knocking. Tricorp just called. They want to move our pitch meeting up. They've asked specifically to hear from you before making their decision. Her eyes were wide. How did you do that? I made a few calls to former contacts, I admitted. Just mentioned I was leading Sullivan's Tricorp initiative now. By week's end, word had spread throughout Sullivan. The initial skepticism from my team had transformed into tentative respect. During Friday's happy hour, another Sullivan tradition that never existed at Reynolds, Thomas clinked glasses with me. The gossip mill from Reynolds says David's been in damage control all week, he said. Apparently, 3 clients have called asking if you're really gone. Just 3. I laughed. So far, he winked. That weekend, I finally cleaned out my home office, removing the Reynolds company photos and awards I'd proudly displayed for years. As I placed them in a storage box, my phone buzzed with an email notification from Diana. Thought you'd want to see this, she wrote, attaching a screenshot from LinkedIn. Reynolds Enterprises had just posted an urgent opening for a director of client relations, the 3rd executive position they'd advertised since my departure. I smiled, closing the box on my old life. They weren't just replacing me. They were trying to replace what I did with 3 separate positions. For the first time since David's betrayal, I felt something beyond anger or vindication. I felt free. The Chicago Business Leadership Summit couldn't have been scheduled at a more perfect time. 6 weeks into my role at Sullivan International, I'd fully hit my stride. Our Tricorp pitch was finalized, my team had coalesced around our strategy, and Victoria had already doubled my responsibilities. I knew Reynolds Enterprises would be there. The summit was too important for any major player to miss. What I didn't anticipate was running directly into David and Melissa within the first 5 minutes of entering the convention center. Amanda. David froze when he spotted me, coffee sloshing over the rim of his cup. Beside him, Melissa's smile tightened into something that looked physically painful. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed my composure. What I hadn't prepared for was how small they both looked to me now. David's confident stance seemed forced, Melissa's designer outfit suddenly trying too hard. David, Melissa. Lovely to see you both. I extended my hand professionally, as though greeting any industry acquaintance. How's Reynolds holding up? Thriving, Melissa replied before David could speak. We've onboarded 2 new enterprise clients since I came aboard. Impressive. We've added 4 at Sullivan, but who's counting? I smiled with practiced warmth. If you'll excuse me, I need to check in before the keynote. As I walked away, I heard Melissa's tense whisper, "You didn't tell me she went to Sullivan." The summit's main hall was arranged with corporate tables, each company displaying their branding and materials. Sullivan's station stood directly across from Reynolds, Victoria's deliberate positioning, no doubt. Throughout the morning sessions, I could feel David's gaze tracking me as I networked with industry leaders who now flocked to meet Victoria Sullivan's new strategic hire. During the luncheon, I was seated at a table with Tricorp's Executive Vice President, Charles Montgomery, another of Victoria's strategic maneuvers. I've heard impressive things about your transition to Sullivan, Charles said between bites of overcooked salmon. Quite the coup for Victoria. Change creates opportunity, I replied, aware that Melissa had taken a seat at the adjacent table, angling her chair to eavesdrop. I'm particularly excited about the possibilities for Tricorp. Your challenges with inventory prediction require a specialized approach. Charles leaned in, engaged. That's exactly what we've been telling vendors for years, but everyone offers the same standardized solutions. From the corner of my eye, I saw Melissa frantically typing notes into her phone. I suppressed a smile and continued outlining precisely how Sullivan's approach differed from the standard industry playbook, the exact playbook I knew Reynolds would be following. After lunch, I excused myself to the restroom, unsurprised when Melissa followed me in. We stood side by side at the mirrors, the silence crackling with tension. I know what you're doing, she finally said, reapplying her lipstick with military precision. I raised an eyebrow. Freshening up before the panel discussions. You're systematically poaching Reynolds' potential clients. David told me how you operate. I turned to face her fully. Is that what he told you? Interesting. Did he also tell you that those clients were relationships I built over years while he was taking credit for my work? Her confident facade flickered. David values everyone's contributions. Stop, I interrupted gently. You don't have to sell me on David Reynolds. I spent 10 years believing in him, same as you once did. The difference is, I was there building his company while you were off getting your MBA. Which makes me qualified for the COO position, she countered. Qualifications on paper aren't the same as proven results, I said. But you'll learn that soon enough. I moved toward the door, then paused. Quick tip: the Henderson account needs their contract renewal next month. They hate automatic increases and always negotiate down from initial offers. If David tries his usual approach, you'll lose them. The afternoon featured a panel on industry innovations. As luck would have it, both David and I had been invited to participate. Seated 3 chairs apart, we maintained professional facades as the moderator led us through predictable questions about market trends and technological adaptations. Then came the curveball. Amanda, you've recently made a high-profile transition from Reynolds to Sullivan. What drives an executive to make such a significant change after a decade with one company? The room hushed. 400 industry professionals leaned forward imperceptibly. Growth requires the right environment, I answered carefully. Like any relationship, a professional partnership needs mutual respect and recognition to thrive. I paused, meeting David's gaze directly for the first time. When that balance shifts, sometimes the boldest move is starting fresh where your contributions are valued appropriately. David's jaw tightened, but he maintained his practiced smile. I'd add that companies evolve too. Sometimes new leadership perspectives are necessary for continued innovation, even when that means difficult personnel changes. Indeed, I replied smoothly. The market ultimately determines which leadership decisions were visionary and which were miscalculations. The tension was palpable enough that the moderator quickly redirected to safer topics. The summit's final event was a cocktail reception where companies unofficially courted potential clients. I was deep in conversation with a promising prospect when David appeared at my elbow. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Privately." In a secluded corridor away from the reception, David's CEO mask finally slipped. "Was it worth burning everything down just because you didn't get the title you wanted?" he demanded. "I didn't burn anything, David. You did the moment you decided a decade of loyalty meant nothing compared to your ex-girlfriend's MBA. It wasn't personal." "It was entirely personal," I cut him off. "And now, so is this. Tricorp is going to choose Sullivan next week. Henderson will leave when their contract expires. You made a business decision, and now you're facing the business consequences. You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" he asked bitterly. I considered this, surprised to discover the truth. "No, David. I don't enjoy it at all. But I'm not sorry either." As I walked back toward the reception, I heard him call after me, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. "I made a mistake, Amanda." I kept walking. The morning we were scheduled to present our final pitch to Tricorp, Victoria called an emergency meeting. When I entered the conference room, the atmosphere was funeral-heavy. Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. "We have a problem," Victoria said without preamble. "Tricorp received an anonymous email last night containing parts of our proposal. Someone's leaked our strategy." My stomach dropped. "How much did they get?" "Enough to make us look unoriginal if Reynolds presents similar solutions," Diana answered, sliding printouts across the table. The leak included our customized inventory prediction model, the cornerstone of our pitch. I scanned the documents, recognizing not just our strategy but my specific language. This wasn't a coincidence or parallel thinking. Someone had accessed our actual documents. "The pitch is in 4 hours," Victoria continued. "Tricorp is still expecting to hear from both Sullivan and Reynolds. Charles Montgomery called me personally to say they're re-evaluating their options, which is executive speak for you're now at a disadvantage." All eyes turned to me, the newest executive, the one with Reynolds connections. "I didn't leak this," I stated firmly, meeting each gaze. "But I know who had the means to do it." 2 years earlier, Reynolds had suffered a minor security breach. In response, I'd implemented a backup system that mirrored critical files to a secure server, access limited to senior executives. David, always dismissive of technical details, had probably forgotten it existed. Melissa, trying to understand company systems, might have stumbled upon it. Someone at Reynolds still has my login credentials, I explained. They could have accessed archived copies of my working documents, including early drafts that match our current approach. Can we prove that? Thomas asked. Not in time for the pitch, Victoria answered. The question is, what do we do now? The room fell silent. Our months of work, my credibility at Sullivan, the defining account that would cement my transition, all hanging by a thread. We have 4 hours, I said slowly. We're going to rebuild our entire presentation from scratch. Diana looked horrified. That's impossible. Not impossible. Necessary. I stood, already sketching ideas on the whiteboard. Reynolds is expecting us to present what was leaked. They'll counter with refinements to the same approach, making us look derivative at best, plagiarists at worst. So we give them something completely different, Victoria finished, a slow smile spreading across her face. Exactly. Tricorp's fundamental problem isn't inventory prediction, that's just a symptom. Their real issue is data integration across acquired companies. We stop trying to predict inventory and instead create a unified data ecosystem that makes prediction unnecessary. For the next 3 hours, our team worked with desperate intensity. We scrapped complex models for elegant simplicity, abandoned conventional approaches for revolutionary thinking. I called in favors from former clients, getting real-world validation for our new concept within hours. As we prepared to leave for Tricorp headquarters, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Watch your back in the presentation. Melissa found evidence you took proprietary Reynolds information. Legal team standing by. I showed Victoria, who merely shrugged. Desperate tactics from desperate people. Let them try. At Tricorp, we were escorted to a preparation room while Reynolds finished their presentation. Through the glass walls of the adjacent conference room, I could see David and Melissa speaking animatedly to the Tricorp executive team. Charles Montgomery's expression was politely interested but non-committal. When Reynolds exited, Melissa made a point of brushing past me. Enjoy explaining how your proposal miraculously matches ours, she whispered, smirking. Ms. Chen, we're ready for Sullivan now, the assistant announced. The Tricorp executives sat expressionless as my team entered. I spotted multiple copies of what must have been the leaked documents on the table. Before we begin, Charles said, I feel we should address the elephant in the room. We received some concerning information last night suggesting potential intellectual property issues between Sullivan and Reynolds. This was it, the moment that would define my new career trajectory. I could defend against the accusation directly, but that would center the entire presentation around the controversy rather than our solution. Mr. Montgomery, I replied calmly, I appreciate your candor. The documents you received represent an early-stage approach that Sullivan has since abandoned. In fact, seeing those documents was a blessing in disguise. It forced us to critically reevaluate whether we were truly offering Tricorp the innovative solution you deserve. Charles's eyebrow raised fractionally. Go on. We've completely reimagined our approach in the past 24 hours. What you're about to see bears no resemblance to those documents, nor to whatever Reynolds presented earlier. I nodded to Diana, who distributed new presentation folders, still warm from the printer, the ink barely dry. Tricorp doesn't have an inventory prediction problem, I began. You have a data ecosystem crisis. For the next 40 minutes, I outlined our revolutionary approach. Rather than applying predictive algorithms to flawed data, as Reynolds undoubtedly proposed, we would rebuild Tricorp's entire information architecture, making prediction organically embedded rather than artificially imposed. As I concluded, the energy in the room had transformed. Charles leaned forward, his typically reserved demeanor animated with interest. This is nothing like what we just heard from Reynolds, he said, glancing at his executive team. It's nothing like anything we've heard before. That's precisely the point, I replied. Tricorp deserves more than conventional thinking slightly repackaged. You deserve a true partnership built on understanding your unique challenges. Charles studied me thoughtfully. Reynolds suggested you might present intellectual property belonging to them. This is clearly not that. No, I agreed. This is something better. As we packed up, Charles walked me to the elevator. Amanda, that was impressive adaptation under pressure. Reynolds seemed very confident we'd find the presentations suspiciously similar. I smiled. They were counting on me being predictable. That was always their mistake. Tricorp's decision came via email on a rainy Tuesday morning, a sterile corporate communication belying the seismic impact it would have. Victoria forwarded it to our executive team with a single-word message: champagne. Sullivan International had secured the Tricorp contract, valued at $47 million over 3 years. Our revolutionary data ecosystem approach had unanimously impressed their board. They specifically cited your presentation as the deciding factor, Victoria told me privately. Charles Montgomery said they'd been prepared to delay their decision after receiving those leaked documents, but your pivot convinced them Sullivan was the only choice. Within hours, the business press caught wind of the story. Sullivan's stock climbed 4% by closing bell, while Reynolds Enterprises dropped nearly 6%. The industry newsletter's headline was merciless: Sullivan snags Tricorp in major upset, Reynolds' new COO strategy questioned. That evening, Thomas forwarded me an internal email accidentally sent to his old Reynolds account, a company-wide message from David announcing he would be personally overseeing client retention strategies, while Melissa focused on internal operations alignment. Corporate speak for damage control. We did it, Diana said, popping into my office with an illicit bottle of Prosecco and paper cups. And by we, I mean mostly you. I accepted the cup but felt strangely hollow. The victory tasted less sweet than I'd imagined during those dark days after David's betrayal. This wasn't just about winning an account, it was about watching something I'd helped build begin to crumble. 3 days later, the real impact of the Tricorp decision began to unfold. Reynolds lost the Westfield account, a mid-sized client I'd personally secured 4 years earlier. Then Global Tech announced they were exploring options as their contract renewal approached. The industry was watching, and Reynolds suddenly looked vulnerable. Henderson called, Victoria announced, walking into my office unannounced. They want to meet with you before renewing with Reynolds. Henderson was Reynolds' oldest client, their first 7-figure account. I'd cultivated that relationship personally for years, nursing it through rough patches and expansion challenges. They specifically asked for me by name, said they were disappointed to learn of your departure, and wanted to explore options. Victoria studied me. You weren't exaggerating about your client relationships, were you? I wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more Reynolds clients reached out through various channels. The dam had broken. The industry party at the Plaza Hotel wasn't officially a celebration of Sullivan's ascendance, but it might as well have been. The quarterly networking event happened to fall exactly 1 month after the Tricorp announcement, and the power shift was palpable. Victoria Sullivan, once viewed as a competent but unremarkable competitor to David Reynolds, now held court while executives from across the industry orbited around her, and, increasingly, around me. Your stock is soaring, Thomas murmured, handing me a martini. Literally. Victoria's discussing equity acceleration for you with the board. I just finished speaking with the CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, another major account sliding away from Reynolds, when I spotted David across the room, standing alone by a window. For once, Melissa wasn't shadowing him. The industry's golden boy suddenly looked tarnished, his usual swarm of admirers noticeably absent. Excuse me, I said to Thomas, placing my barely touched drink on a passing tray. David tensed as I approached, bracing for a public humiliation he probably felt he deserved. Instead, I simply stood beside him, both of us gazing out at the city lights. Henderson is meeting with me tomorrow, I said quietly. He nodded, unsurprised. I know. Richards and Howard too, I imagine. Yes. David sighed, the sound of a man witnessing his empire crumble. You're not just taking clients, Amanda. Sarah from product development resigned yesterday. Martin from engineering the day before. They're all reaching out to you, aren't they? They were. My LinkedIn inbox overflowed with former colleagues seeking references, recommendations, or direct paths to Sullivan. People go where they feel valued, I replied. We stood in silence, the party's energy a stark contrast to our quiet corner. Melissa's resigned, he finally said. Effective next week. I absorbed this without surprise. The board unanimously demanded it after Tricorp. But it was my decision to make it public. She's the official scapegoat. His voice held no satisfaction. They are discussing my position next quarter. The Reynolds board questioning David's leadership would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. Now it seemed inevitable. You could help me, he said suddenly, turning to face me. Come back to Reynolds. Named partner. Equal equity. Whatever you want. The offer was everything I'd once dreamed of: recognition, power, vindication. David Reynolds, admitting he needed me, offering me the keys to his kingdom. I studied him, this man I'd once admired, then resented, now simply understood. There's no going back, David, I said gently. You don't need me as a partner. You need to become the leader you've always pretended to be. His expression hardened. So this is your revenge? Dismantling everything we built? No, I replied. This is the market correcting itself. Value recognizes value. Reynolds thrived because of the culture we created together, the one you sacrificed for personal reasons. And Sullivan is building something better. I straightened my shoulders. With me as a full partner from day one. David's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, his face falling further. Global Tech just cancelled tomorrow's meeting. I assume they're seeing you instead. I nodded. Thursday morning. He pocketed his phone with a bitter laugh. You said you knew how to destroy me. I didn't believe you could actually do it. I'm not destroying you, David, I corrected him. I'm building myself. There's a difference. As I walked away, rejoining Victoria and my Sullivan colleagues, I felt the weight of the past finally lifting. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my own value, and helping others recognize theirs too. The reckoning wasn't just for David. It was for an entire industry that too often confused loyalty with servitude, dedication with doormathood. And it was just beginning. 12 months can change everything. On the anniversary of my departure from Reynolds, I stood at the window of my expanded corner office at Sullivan International, watching the city below. My new executive assistant, poached from Reynolds, naturally, knocked gently before entering. Victoria wants you in the boardroom in 5 minutes, she said. Something about a major announcement. I smoothed my Armani suit, another marker of my transformed life, and checked my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back held herself differently than the one who'd stormed out of Reynolds a year ago. This woman radiated quiet authority, comfortable power. Sullivan International had grown 42% over the past year, with the strategic division I led accounting for more than half that expansion. We'd absorbed 11 former Reynolds clients, including Henderson, whose loyalty had finally broken after David failed to appear at a critical presentation, sending Melissa instead, his final mistake as her supervisor. The industry equilibrium had shifted. Sullivan was no longer the upstart challenger but a dominant force. Reynolds Enterprises, meanwhile, had entered a controlled descent, not a catastrophic crash, but a steady diminishment of influence and prestige. I'd heard David had finally been removed as CEO 3 months ago. The news hadn't brought the vindication I once expected. Instead, I'd felt a strange sympathy. He'd created something meaningful before letting ego cloud his judgment. Now he was paying the price. Victoria was waiting in the boardroom with the executive team and a cluster of people I didn't recognize: sharp suits, power ties, the unmistakable aura of corporate attorneys. Perfect timing, Amanda, Victoria said, gesturing me toward the seat at her right hand. I wanted everyone here for this. She nodded to one of the suits, who distributed folders around the table. Sullivan International is acquiring Reynolds Enterprises. The room erupted in murmurs. I sat perfectly still, the news washing over me in waves. The paperwork will be finalized next week, Victoria continued. We're purchasing their client list, intellectual property, and key personnel. Most of their executive team will be departing, with generous severance packages. My mind raced. And David? Resigned yesterday. He'll receive a consulting fee for 6 months to assist with the transition, but he won't be joining Sullivan. The meeting continued with discussions of integration strategies, restructuring plans, and market messaging. I contributed automatically, my thoughts elsewhere. The acquisition made perfect business sense. Reynolds still had valuable assets and talent despite their decline, but the personal implications felt surreal. After the meeting, Victoria held me back. There's someone waiting in your office. I thought you might want privacy for this conversation. I knew who it would be before opening my door. David stood by my window, looking out at the same city view I'd been contemplating earlier. He'd lost weight, and his once perfect suit hung slightly loose on his frame. When he turned, I noticed the first streaks of grey at his temples. Amanda. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Nice office. Better than the one you had at Reynolds. Better than yours was, too, I replied, but without malice. He nodded, acknowledging the point. Victoria said you didn't know about the acquisition until today. I didn't. But you're not surprised. It's the logical conclusion to the path we both started walking a year ago. David sank into one of my visitor chairs, suddenly looking exhausted. I've been thinking about that conversation we had at the plaza. You said I needed to become the leader I pretended to be. He ran a hand through his hair. I tried, Amanda. After Melissa left, I really tried. I know, I said, sitting across from him. And I did know. Former Reynolds employees who'd joined Sullivan had kept me informed of David's desperate attempts to right the ship, the late nights, the personal calls to wavering clients, the restructured teams. Sometimes damage can't be undone. Reynolds was never the same after you left, he admitted. I told myself it was just business, that no one person could matter that much. I was wrong. It wasn't just me leaving, I said. It was why I left. The company culture fractured when you showed everyone that loyalty and performance meant less than connections and credentials. He winced. For what it's worth, you were right about Melissa. She wasn't ready. I let personal history cloud my judgment. And personal pride, I added. That too. He sighed. So what happens now? Victoria offered me a 6-month consulting contract, but we both know that's just a graceful exit. I considered him thoughtfully. The anger that had driven me for months after leaving Reynolds had long since burned away, replaced by something more complex, not forgiveness exactly, but perspective. Start over, I suggested. That's what I did. You're still David Reynolds. You built something meaningful once. You can do it again. Without you as my secret weapon. His attempt at humor fell flat. Without using anyone as a weapon or a stepping stone, I corrected. As a true partner to whoever joins you next time. He nodded slowly. I deserved this, didn't I? Watching everything I built get absorbed by Sullivan. Business isn't about what people deserve, David. It's about value creation and recognition. You stopped recognizing value, in me, in your team, in your culture. The market corrected itself. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared history settling between us. I am sorry, Amanda, he finally said. Not just for the business consequences. For betraying your trust. I know, I replied. And somehow, I did. After David left, Victoria found me still sitting in contemplation. You all right? She asked. Processing, I admitted. It's been quite a year. It's just the beginning, Victoria said, leaning against my door frame. The board voted this morning. When I step down next year, you're their unanimous choice for CEO. I blinked in surprise. You're retiring. Transitioning, she corrected with a smile. Building Sullivan was my life's work. Watching you lead it into the future will be my legacy. That evening, I met with my original team from Sullivan, the ones who'd worked with me on that pivotal Tricorp pitch, now all promoted to senior leadership positions. To Victoria, Thomas toasted. For having the vision to hire Amanda. To Reynolds, Diana added with a smirk, for having the stupidity to lose her. I raised my glass with a different perspective. To recognizing value, in others and in ourselves. Later, walking home through the city streets, I passed the old Reynolds building. The signage was already changing, Sullivan International's logo being installed by a night crew. I paused, watching workers dismantle the letters I'd once been so proud to walk beneath. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the acquisition. You deserve it. Dr." I put my phone away without responding and continued home, focusing not on the past being dismantled behind me, but on the future rising ahead.